there was a city the entire world believed to be impossible to conquer. For more than 1,000 years, armies came, laid siege to its walls, and left in defeat, until a young man of 21 said a single sentence: "Either I take Constantinople, or Constantinople takes me." That city was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, what we today call the Byzantine Empire. It was the last living remnant of the ancient Roman Empire. 1,000 years after the fall of Rome, the Rome of the East still stood behind the most famous walls in history. Those walls had a name: the Theodosian Walls. Raised in the 5th century, they were a feat of terrifying engineering. 3 lines of defense, a deep moat, towers every few meters. For exactly 1,000 years, they stopped Huns, Persians, Arabs, Bulgars. No one got through. But the story of this video does not begin at those walls. It begins nearly 200 years earlier, with a man no one expected to matter, the chief of a small tribe, on a forgotten frontier of Anatolia, in what is today Turkey. His name was Osman. Around the year 1299, he led a small principality of Turkish warriors, hemmed in between the vast Byzantine Empire and the ruins of Mongol power. He was one among dozens of chieftains just like him. No one wrote down the day he became independent, but Osman held a perfect position, right on the border with the weakened Byzantine territories. While the other principalities fought among themselves, he grew by biting the edges of an old and weary empire. From his name, Osman, would come the word the world would learn: Ottoman. Generation after generation, Osman's descendants did the unthinkable. They swallowed one Byzantine city after another. They crossed into Europe. They surrounded what was left of the empire on every side. Until, by the 15th century, the Byzantine Empire had shrunk to almost nothing, just Constantinople and a few scattered scraps of land. The city that had once ruled half the known world became an island surrounded. The Ottomans were on all sides, in Europe and in Asia. Constantinople was a heart beating inside the body of the enemy. Only one thing was missing: someone willing to do what no one had managed in 1,000 years. Remember this: that someone was a teenager whom his own father's advisors considered far too weak, and he would prove he was exactly the opposite. In the year 1432, in Edirne, Mehmed was born, the 3rd son of Sultan Murad II. Being the 3rd, no one imagined he would ever rule. The throne was not meant for him. On paper, he was a spare prince. But his older brothers died, and suddenly Mehmed became the heir. His father, Murad, did something curious. At 12 years old, he abdicated and placed a boy on the throne. Mehmed became a child sultan. It was a disaster. The court did not respect the boy. Christian enemies saw weakness and marched against the Ottomans. In a panic, the advisors begged the father to return. Murad retook the throne, and the boy sultan was humiliated, sent back to his studies. To many, Mehmed was a joke, but that humiliation forged something in him. Mehmed threw himself into his studies with a terrifying hunger. He learned Turkish, Arabic, Persian, and it is said Greek and Latin as well. He read military history. He was obsessed with one name in particular: Alexander the Great. He wanted to be the conqueror of his own age. And one obsession grew above all others: Constantinople, that city that had resisted every sultan before him. Mehmed studied its walls, its weak points, its history. While the court thought him a dreamer, he was already planning the impossible. In 1451, Murad II died. Mehmed, now 19, ascended the throne for the 2nd time. Foreign ambassadors breathed a sigh of relief. After all, it was only that inexperienced young man again. They committed the greatest misreading in history. That inexperienced young man had spent years planning one thing and one thing only. Mehmed's first move was cold and calculated. To make sure no one would contest the throne, he had his infant half-brother eliminated, a brutal succession practice of the era. Then he turned his eyes to the true target. There was no speech. There was an engineering plan. Constantinople sat on a strait of water. Whoever controlled that strait could strangle the city. So Mehmed ordered a colossal fortress built on the European shore at the narrowest point of the Bosphorus in just a few months. The Byzantines watched, terrified, as the stones rose. But there was nothing they could do. That fortress had cannons aimed at the water. Any ship that tried to pass through to resupply Constantinople would be sunk. The Ottomans nicknamed it the throat cutter. Before the siege even began, Mehmed had already cut off the city's supply line. Constantinople was being slowly suffocated. But the Theodosian Walls were still there. 1,000 years of stone. No army in history had ever pierced them. Mehmed knew that with swords and ladders, it would be just one more failure. He needed something the world had never seen. And then a man knocked on his door. The man was called Urban, or Orban, a master cannon founder from Hungary. Curiously, he had first offered his services to the Byzantine emperor, but Constantinople was bankrupt and could not pay. So Urban went to the enemy. Mehmed paid him 4 times what he asked. Mehmed asked him a direct question. Can you cast a cannon capable of bringing down the walls of Constantinople? Urban answered that he could, and that he could bring down even the walls of Babylon. It was the right answer for the wrong man to have as an enemy. What Urban built became legend. A monstrous cannon, the Basilic Bombard, more than 8 meters long. It fired stone balls weighing between 400 and 600 kilograms. To drag it to Constantinople took 60 oxen and more than 200 men. The cannon was so massive it could only fire a few times a day. It needed hours to cool between each shot, or it would explode. But when it fired, the blast was heard for kilometers, and the stone ball tore through the air like the end of the world. It was heavy artillery being born before the eyes of the Middle Ages. Think about what that meant. Walls that had resisted everything for 1,000 years suddenly faced a force that ancient engineering had never imagined. Gunpowder was rewriting the rules of war, and Mehmed had put that new rule on his side. In the spring of 1453, the Ottoman army gathered before Constantinople. Estimates vary, but the numbers spoke of somewhere between 80,000 and more than 100,000 soldiers, a fleet of more than 300 ships, and more than 70 cannons aimed at the most famous walls in the world. Inside the city, perhaps 7,000 or 8,000 defenders. 7,000 against an immense army. The math was absurd. But Constantinople had 2 things on its side, those walls, and a man who refused to flee. His name was Constantine XI Palaiologos. He was the emperor of Constantinople, and, though no one knew it at the time, the last Roman emperor in history. 1,500 years after Rome, the line would end with him. Constantine was no fool. He knew the math. He knew he would probably die. He sent desperate letters to all of Christian Europe begging for help. Europe, divided and distrustful, sent almost nothing. Constantinople was, in practice, alone against the world. Mehmed offered Constantine a way out. Surrender the city, and you live with lands and honor. Constantine refused. His answer went down in history. He would give up his own life and everything he had, but the city was not his to give. It belonged to all who lived there and to God. On April 6, 1453, the siege began in earnest. On the 7th, Urban's Basilic Bombard fired for the first time against the walls. The colossal stone struck the ancient stone, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the Theodosian Walls began to crack. But then something happened that no one expected. At night, the people of Constantinople came out with torches and repaired the walls. They piled up earth, wood, barrels. The stone wall the cannon knocked down by day became an improvised wall again by night. The siege turned into a brutal race. To keep the Ottoman fleet from entering the harbor, the Byzantines had a brilliant defense. A giant iron chain stretched across the water, sealing the mouth of an inlet called the Golden Horn. That chain floated on wooden logs. No ship got past it. The harbor was locked. For days, the Ottomans tried to break the chain and failed. The Byzantine fleet, small as it was, dominated that harbor. It was a dead end. And that was when Mehmed had one of the most audacious ideas in all of military history. If he could not send his ships through the water, he would send his ships over land. Mehmed ordered a road built out of wooden logs greased with animal tallow, climbing the hill of Galata behind the enemy positions. And then, in a single night, thousands of men and oxen dragged some 70 Ottoman ships up and over that mountain. Whole vessels sliding over logs, climbing uphill in the dark. an entire fleet crossing dry land, something that seemed impossible. When the sun rose, the defenders of Constantinople looked out at the Golden Horn, the harbor they thought was locked and safe, and saw Ottoman ships floating inside it. The iron chain had been useless. The enemy had gone around 1,000 years of defense in a single night. The psychological effect was devastating. Suddenly, the Byzantines had to defend the harbor side too, the side that had always been safe. The defenders, already few, were now stretched even thinner. And outside, Urban's cannons kept pounding, day after day, against the 1,000-year-old stone. The weeks passed. The siege lasted 53 days. Inside, hunger, exhaustion, and fear. Outside, an army that never stopped bombarding. Every night Constantine XI walked the walls, rallying his men, fighting beside them as a soldier, not as an emperor hiding away. Mehmed knew that time was his enemy too. The longer the siege dragged on, the greater the risk that a Christian fleet would arrive from Europe or that his army would lose heart. So he decided to stake everything on one last gamble. He set the day for the final assault. Before the attack, Mehmed promised his men something in keeping with the war customs of the age: 3 days of free plunder in the conquered city. The motivation ran through the ranks like fire. On the other side of the walls, in Constantinople, the last Mass was held, Catholics and Orthodox praying together for the first and last time inside the great church of Hagia Sophia. In the early hours of May 29, 1453, Mehmed launched the final assault. First, waves of irregular troops, sent to tire and bleed the defenders. Then, better soldiers. And last, the killing blow, the Janissaries. The Janissaries were the Sultan's elite corps, the most feared soldiers in the world at the time. And their origin was astonishing. They were Christians. Boys recruited as children in the Balkans, under a system called the Devshirme, converted to Islam, and trained their whole lives as warriors loyal to the Sultan alone. With no noble families, no other loyalties, the Janissaries lived for the Sultan and for war. They were disciplined, fanatical, and deadly. When Mehmed unleashed the Janissaries against the exhausted walls of Constantinople, it was the beginning of the end. The defenders resisted with a desperate courage. But then, the chronicles say, a small side gate in the walls, called the Kirkaporta, was left unlocked by accident. A handful of Ottomans came through it and raised a banner on a tower. The cry spread. The city had been breached. Panic took hold. The defenses collapsed. And in the middle of that chaos, the last Roman emperor made his choice. Constantine XI tore off his imperial insignia, so he would not be recognized, drew his sword, and plunged into the fight as an ordinary soldier. Constantine XI was never seen alive again. His body was never identified among the dead. The last emperor of a line that reached back to Rome simply vanished in the battle and became legend. To this day, some say he did not die, but was turned to marble, waiting to return. Constantinople had fallen. On the afternoon of May 29, 1453, after 1,100 years, the Eastern Roman Empire ceased to exist. The last flame of Rome went out, and a young man of 21 rode toward the gates. Mehmed II entered the conquered city on horseback. He was 21 years old. He had done what no army had managed in 1,000 years. From that day on, the world would call him by a new name, Mehmed Fadi, Mehmed the Conqueror. Tradition holds that, seeing the magnificent city, part of it already sacked by his own soldiers, Mehmed recited a melancholy verse from a Persian poet about how time destroys even the palaces of emperors. The conqueror, at the height of victory, felt the weight of the history he was treading upon. He rode straight to the heart of Constantinople, the Hagia Sophia. For nearly 1,000 years, it had been the greatest cathedral in Christendom, a dome so immense it seemed to float, an engineering miracle that left visitors speechless. Mehmed entered it as a conqueror, and then he made a decision that would change that monument forever. Mehmed ordered the Hagia Sophia converted into a mosque. That very day, the first Islamic prayer was said beneath that giant dome. The greatest church in the world became one of the greatest mosques in the world. But Mehmed did not destroy the Hagia Sophia. He preserved it. Instead of raising the symbol of the enemy, he absorbed it. He added a minaret, a niche facing Mecca, a pulpit. The Roman Christian building still stood, transformed, a perfect metaphor for what the new empire would do with everything it conquered. Mehmed did not merely want to destroy Constantinople. He wanted it to be reborn as the capital of his empire. He saw himself as the new heir of Rome, not the destroyer of the Roman Empire, its continuation under a new faith and a new banner. The city had been brutally sacked. Mehmed needed to rebuild it and repopulate it. So he did something that surprises anyone who imagines conquerors only as destroyers. He invited people back. Greeks, Armenians, Jews, merchants from every corner. Come, rebuild, live here. And he guaranteed something rare for the age: freedom of worship. Mehmed allowed the Orthodox Christians to keep their patriarch and their churches. He allowed the Jews, persecuted across much of Christian Europe, to live in peace. It was the foundation of a system that would organize the empire for centuries. That system became known as the millet. Each religious community, Orthodox, Armenians, Jews, governed itself in matters of faith, marriage, and inheritance, with its own courts and schools. It was not full equality, and non-Muslims paid a special tax. But it was a tolerance that much of the Europe of the time simply did not know. Because of this, while Christian kingdoms expelled and persecuted Jews, thousands of them found refuge in the Ottoman Empire. The city Mehmed had conquered became a mosaic of faiths and peoples, teeming with trade, alive once more. And the city gained, in time, a new name. The Ottomans and the people came to call it differently, and centuries later it would be officially renamed Istanbul. Constantinople, the Rome of the East, was now the most powerful Muslim capital in the world. Mehmed reigned for nearly 30 more years after the conquest. He expanded the empire through the Balkans, through Anatolia, along the Black Sea. He transformed a frontier principality into the greatest power between Europe and Asia. When he died, in 1481, he left behind an empire, no longer a tribe. But the story of the Ottoman Empire did not stop with Mehmed. He had built the foundation. The peak was still to come, and it would come with a great-grandson of his, perhaps the most famous sultan of them all. His name was Suleiman. Europe called him Suleiman the Magnificent. The Ottomans called him Suleiman the Lawgiver. He came to the throne in 1520, and under his command the empire reached its greatest size, its greatest wealth, its greatest glory. Under Suleiman, the Ottoman Empire ruled more than 25 million people across 3 continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa. His armies reached the gates of Vienna. His navy dominated the Mediterranean, and his laws, organized by him, would survive for centuries. Suleiman made Istanbul one of the most splendid cities on the planet. Monumental mosques, gardens, libraries, works of art. The Islamic world lived a golden age, and all of it rose upon the city that Mehmed the Conqueror had taken nearly a century before. The Ottoman Empire would last more than 600 years in all, from Osman's little principality to the early 20th century. It was one of the longest-lived and most influential empires in the history of humankind. And the exact point at which it stopped being a kingdom and became a world empire was that morning of May 29th, 1453. Think about what that day meant for the world. The fall of Constantinople is seen by many historians as the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the modern era. It was one of those dates where the world, before and after, was simply never the same again. The fall also scattered across Europe Greek scholars who fled the city carrying ancient manuscripts. That knowledge helped feed the Renaissance in Italy. Indirectly, the taking of Constantinople helped ignite the cultural brilliance of Western Europe. And there is a detail that changed the history of all humanity. With the Ottomans controlling the old trade routes to the east, the kingdoms of Europe began to look for alternative paths to India and China by sea. It was that search which, a few decades later, drove navigators to cross oceans and reach the Americas. In other words, the fall of Constantinople is, surprisingly, tied to the age of discovery itself. The Ottoman blockade of the land routes helped push Europe toward the sea, and the sea carried Columbus to a continent he did not even know existed. And the Hagia Sophia? It crossed the centuries. It was a Christian cathedral for nearly 1,000 years. It was an imperial mosque for nearly 500. Today, still standing in Istanbul, it is one of the most visited buildings in the world, a silent witness to empires that were born and died around it. So who was Mehmed II? The teenager the court considered too weak to reign. The dreamer obsessed with Alexander. The strategist who dragged ships over a mountain. The man who ended the Roman Empire and began the modern era. All of it at 21 years of age. If this story gripped you, do one thing for me. Comment down below what impressed you most. The ships that crossed the land, Urban's giant cannon, or the last emperor who vanished in battle and became legend. And if you love history told the way it deserves to be told, big, real, and impossible to forget, subscribe to World and Stories. Because the world is full of stories like this one, waiting to be told. A city held out for 1,000 years. A young man of 21 took it in 53 days. And the world, after that day, was never the same again. Until the next story.